So imagine a character who spends her entire life just trying to completely destroy you. She steals your most powerful weapons. She plots with your absolute worst enemies.
Right. She basically dedicates her every waking moment to, usurping your throne.
Exactly. But then, when the war is finally over and you're lying there on the battlefield bleeding to death, she is the only one who actually comes to comfort you. She, like, takes you in her arms and carries you away to be healed.
It's an incredible image. It's arguably the most complex narrative web in all of European folklore.
Yeah, and you really handed us a massive, completely contradictory stack of sources for our deep dive today. I mean, we've got ancient Welsh poetry, 12th century historical analysis, depth psychology, all of it centering on the ultimate paradox of Western mythology.
We're talking, of course, about King Arthur's sister, Morgan Le Fay.
We are. And the mission you've set for us today is to trace her incredible 1,000-year transformation. We're going to follow her from a benevolent ancient healer queen to a demonized sword-stealing antagonist, and finally to a reclaimed feminist icon.
She is the one who wounds, and she's the one who heals.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because just looking at the sheer volume of literature you sent over, how does one single character hold all of that contradictory energy at once?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the architecture of the myth itself, because Morgan's story isn't just, one coherent narrative written by a single author.
Right.
If you approach it like a modern novel, it will absolutely drive you crazy. You have to look at it as a geological formation, a layered accumulation.
So it's built up over time.
Exactly. We are talking about centuries of Welsh oral tradition that blends into Breton fairy lore, which then gets entirely overwritten by 12th century Latin chronicles.
Oh, wow.
And then it's dramatically mutated again by French medieval romances, and finally reinterpreted by modern esoteric thinkers.
Okay, so to figure out how she became the ultimate bad guy of Camelot, we first have to peel back all those layers, right? We have to figure out who she was before she was even Arthur's sister. And the sources you provided point us straight into the ancient Celtic world.
Precisely. Because before she was Morgan Le Fay, she was something much older. Her roots are traceable to a very specific cluster of Celtic sovereignty goddesses.
Even her name gives us a clue, doesn't it?
It does. It's an archaeological clue in itself. The Brythonic word Morgan, and remember, Brythonic refers to the ancient Celtic language spoken in Britain before the Anglo-Saxons arrived. That comes from Mor, which means the sea.
Okay, so more is sea.
Right. And later, that was combined with the French word fée, meaning fairy or enchantress. So her original domain was really the untamed magic of the land itself.
The research you gave us specifically highlights the Morrigan from Irish tradition as her most direct mythological ancestor. And I gotta say, the Morrigan is not someone you want to mess with.
No, definitely not.
She is this tripartite goddess of fate, war, and death. She literally shapeshifts into a crow to fly over the battlefield and decide who lives and who dies. It sounds, well, terrifying.
It is terrifying, and that association with battlefield death often makes modern audiences assume she was a villain.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the medieval monks who later wrote down her stories certainly thought she was evil. But if you dig into the Celtic mindset, she wasn't. There's this incredibly powerful image in the mythology where the Morrigan is washing the weapons and the armor of a warrior who has been chosen to die.
Wait, washing the armor of the doomed?
Yes.
That changes her completely.
Mhm.
I mean, if she is doing the washing, she isn't the one causing the death, right? She is honoring the transition. It sounds more like an expression of cosmic grief, not malice.
That is a really profound way to look at it. It is a ritual act of sacred passage. She is primal truth made manifest.
Wow.
She represents the absolute inevitability of death, but also the necessity of transformation, because life feeds on life. The ancient Celts understood that deeply, and we see similar figures in the Welsh tradition too, like Modron, the divine mother figure.
And the Grigorian, right? I was reading up on them in the notes you sent.
Yes, exactly.
They're these mystical lake ladies who emerge from the water to offer otherworldly wisdom to humans. And they were all tied to this pan-Celtic concept of the sovereignty goddess, which I just found absolutely fascinating.
It's central to the whole mythos.
I was thinking about this concept, and it almost feels like a modern political mandate, like winning the popular vote. Except instead of getting your power from a ballot box, it has this deeply spiritual, earthly weight.
That's a great way to put it.
The king only gets his power, his actual legitimacy to rule, because the land itself, the goddess, grants it to him.
The king is literally married to the land. If his reign is just, the crops grow, the rivers flow. But if he's corrupt, the land becomes a wasteland. The sovereignty goddess is the one who enforces that balance.
But see, that raises a massive question for me. If her origins are this grounded, this divine, how does she become a fairy or a wicked witch in the later stories? I mean, if she is the literal lifeblood of the earth, why downgrade her?
Well, because early cultures simply didn't view these goddesses as good or evil in a binary sense. They were natural forces.
Right.
Think about it. A storm isn't evil, but it can utterly destroy your village. A river isn't intrinsically good, but it gives you the water you need to survive.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
These goddesses dealt with the threshold, that liminal space between life, death, and transformation. But as culture shifted, especially with the rise of institutionalized, centralized religion, that unpredictable threshold power became very threatening.
Threatening to the new social order.
Exactly. So you have this incredibly resilient goddess who survives by sort of hiding in the folklore.
Which brings us to her very first appearance in a literary text, right before the smear campaigns really began. We are looking at the year 1150, written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, in a Latin text called Vita Merlini, The Life of Merlin.
In this text, she is referred to simply as Morgan. And what stands out immediately is that she's unambiguously benevolent.
No evil plotting.
Absolutely no dark sorcery, no plotting against Arthur, no petty jealousies. She is a pure, untainted healer. She can cure any wound, she can fly, and she is the chief of 9 sisters who rule the Isle of Avalon.
That 9 sisters detail really stood out in the sources, because 9 is such a numerologically charged number across so many ancient traditions.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes you think of the 9 muses in Greece, or the Vestal Virgins in Rome. It implies a sacred college of feminine intelligence. And Avalon itself is deeply symbolic. In Latin, Geoffrey calls it Insula Pomorum, the Isle of Apples.
Which is a brilliant mythological topography. It's a pre-agricultural paradise. It is much closer to the Greek Elysian Fields or the Celtic Tir na Nog than anything else.
Where things just grow naturally.
Right. The apples in Avalon grow spontaneously. They are completely untouched by human labor or the suffering of the fallen world. And Geoffrey makes it very clear that Morgan doesn't just sit on a throne and rule Avalon like a human queen. She is its native intelligence.
She and the place are one and the same.
She and the sacred place are the exact same entity.
I have to bring up the Glastonbury tomb incident here, because the historical context you provided in the sources is just brilliant. In 1191, the monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed they miraculously discovered King Arthur's physical tomb right there on their grounds in Somerset.
A highly convenient discovery for the English crown.
Exactly. I mean, think about how clever this was from a medieval PR standpoint. The Welsh rebels firmly believed Arthur wasn't dead, right? They thought he was resting in Avalon, waiting to return and liberate them from English rule.
He was a massive messianic threat to the crown.
So the monks conveniently find his literal physical bones buried in the dirt. By giving Arthur a physical mundane grave, they killed the magical hope of his return. They deliberately grounded the mythological Avalon into literal geography.
They literally buried the Welsh rebellion.
So wild.
It was an ideological weapon disguised as archaeology. But returning to Morgan herself in Geoffrey's text, you mentioned her ability to shapeshift, because she appears as a beautiful woman, an old hag, a bird.
Right, and I want to push back on how we usually interpret shapeshifting today. Because when we see a character shapeshifting in modern media, we instantly assume it's deceptive.
Sure, like a trick.
Yeah, like a villain in a superhero movie mimicking a guard to sneak into a vault. But based on her origins as a sovereignty goddess, it doesn't sound like a sneaky disguise at all. It sounds like she embodies ontological fluidity.
Ontological fluidity, yeah.
She shifts because nature shifts. She changes form the exact same way winter inevitably turns into spring. It's not a lie. It's just the changing of the seasons.
What's fascinating here is how depth psychology approaches that exact idea. Psychoanalysts like Carl Jung view this kind of shape-shifting as representing the protean nature of the deep feminine, or the unconscious mind itself.
Oh, interesting.
It refuses to be locked into a single, fixed, rational form because life itself isn't fixed. She occupies the threshold. She is the embodiment of change.
So if she was this perfect, nature-bound healer, the literal changing of the seasons, what on earth happened? I mean, how does the ultimate healer become the ultimate bad guy?
Well, we are entering the era of the French romances and Thomas Malory. And it's really a tragic literary assassination.
Let's get into it.
Beginning in the late 12th and 13th centuries, we get the French prose romances. It's a massive, collaborative story universe known as the Vulgate cycle.
Like a medieval cinematic universe.
Basically, yes, it standardized all the Arthurian lore, and in this process, they radically transformed her. The exact same figure who cradled Arthur now becomes his sworn enemy.
The sources you gathered break down exactly how this vilification happened, and there were three main drivers. First, and probably the most powerful, was Christianization.
Right. The medieval church was deeply suspicious of unregulated feminine power.
Especially any power tied to magical knowledge, herbalism, and sexuality.
Exactly. A woman with that kind of threshold power operating outside the bounds of the patriarchal church was suddenly viewed as extremely dangerous. So the ancient revered healer was systematically rewritten as a wicked witch.
The sovereign goddess, who originally legitimized the king, became the dark enchantress trying to subvert the divine, God-given order.
Yes.
The second driver is just infuriating. It's courtly love politics. The French writers basically reduced her from a cosmic force of nature to a jealous, spurned ex-girlfriend.
It's such a massive downgrade.
It is. The news story goes that Morgan falls in love with a knight named Guiomar, and Queen Guinevere breaks them up to protect the court's reputation. So Morgan develops this petty, lasting hatred for Guinevere, and by extension, Arthur.
It is a deliberate strategy of diminishment. Think about it. If you make her motivations petty and jealous, you completely strip away her cosmic authority. She is no longer fighting for the soul of the land. She's just holding a grudge over a boy.
And the third driver is how they fundamentally changed the nature of her magic. In the older myths, her magic was innate, right? It's just who she was.
Correct.
But the medieval romances introduced this new idea of learned sorcery. They wrote that she actually learned all her magic by studying under Merlin.
Which was a profound demotion. It implies that her power is no longer sacred and natural, it is acquired. And therefore, for a woman in that strict medieval era, it is unnatural and corrupt. It's stolen knowledge.
And this entire smear campaign peaks with Thomas Malory's La Morte d'Arthur in 1485. Because in Malory, she is relentlessly plotting against Arthur.
Yeah.
She hits absolute peak villainy.
She really does.
She even steals Excalibur's magical scabbard, which is crucial because the scabbard is what magically prevents Arthur from bleeding to death in battle, and she gives it to her lover, Avalon, to use against the king. It is an incredibly intimate betrayal.
She becomes the ultimate seductress, a schemer, a practitioner of the dark arts who will stop at nothing to see Camelot burn.
But if you're sitting there wondering why they didn't just write her out of the story completely, that's exactly the question we had when looking at your sources.
Right, it's the big question.
If you just need a villain for Arthur to fight, why not write her out and replace her with the traditional monster? A dragon, an evil warlord from across the sea, anything. Why keep the sister around just to demonize her?
Because that is the ultimate paradox of the Arthurian myth, and it is the absolute key to understanding her survival. They couldn't erase her.
They couldn't.
No, the pre-Christian architecture of the story was simply too foundational to tear down completely. Even in Malory, after all the plotting, after stealing the protective scabbard, after trying to orchestrate his murder multiple times, when Arthur finally falls at the bloody battle of Camlan, who comes to get him?
It's Morgan.
It is Morgan. She arrives in the black barge with the weeping queens to take Arthur across the water to Avalon. She is still the one who receives him at the end of all things.
Wow.
No matter how thoroughly they tried to rewrite her as a villain, they couldn't escape the older, deeper pattern. She remains the keeper of the sovereignty cycle.
So because that original mythology was impossible to fully erase, her sacred functions just sort of went underground in the later texts. They were hiding in plain sight.
And you see this hidden architecture everywhere once you know what you are looking for. Take the Holy Grail, for instance.
Oh, the sources blew my mind with this connection. Morgan was originally the keeper of the Cauldron of Anne in Welsh mythology, right?
Yes.
It was this massive, magical vessel of resurrection and supreme wisdom located deep in the underworld.
But when the myth was Christianized, the cauldron was transformed into the Holy Grail, the cup of Christ.
Right.
And Morgan's role as the sovereign keeper of that vessel was stripped away. It was handed over to male knights on their holy quests, and to the Fisher King, the wounded male guardian of the Grail. Her domain was entirely co-opted.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We see her hidden role pop up brilliantly in the 14th century poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
Oh, absolutely.
For anyone who hasn't read it, it's this bizarre, terrifying story where a giant green knight rides into Camelot, lets Gawain chop off his head with an axe, casually picks his own severed head up off the floor while it's still bleeding green blood, and tells Gawain to meet him in a year to return the favor.
It's widely considered a classic medieval test of chivalry.
But the twist at the very end of the poem is that Morgan Le Fay orchestrated the entire horrific game. Now, usually people read that and go, see, she's evil, she's torturing Gawain just for fun. But the sources suggest something completely different.
Completely different.
She isn't acting as a villain. She is acting as an initiatory ordeal giver.
She's functioning as a mystery school teacher.
Okay.
She designed the brutal decapitation test specifically to expose the pride, the arrogance, and the hidden moral weaknesses of Arthur's court.
Wow.
She sends the hero into the terrifying underworld of his own psyche, essentially, for his own necessary transformation.
It's like a tough love professor who intentionally gives an impossibly hard exam.
Yes.
They aren't giving you the exam because they hate you and want you to fail. They give it to you to shatter your ego, to force you to confront exactly what you don't know so you can actually grow into a better version of yourself.
That's a perfect analogy. And we also see this hidden architecture preserved in her complex relationship with Merlin. The later texts try to frame them as bitter rivals, but structurally they act as twin poles of magic.
Right, Merlin represents linear time, prophecy, rationality, the mind. He is the solar masculine.
While Morgan represents cyclical time, she is the embodied feeling, the darkness of the night, the lunar feminine.
They bracket the entire mythology perfectly. Merlin engineers Arthur's birth from the liminal edge of the beginning, and Morgan receives Arthur at his death from the liminal edge of the end.
Which makes their sibling bond so much more profound. She and Arthur are half-siblings through their mother, Igraine.
So they share this ancient matrilineal bloodline.
Exactly. When they fight in the stories, it's not a war against some external foreign invader. It's an internal conflict within the very body of Britain itself.
It is the heavenly civilized king and his dark, untamed sister.
And at the end, she takes him across the water. It's unconditional love. It completely transcends whatever narrative, morality, or petty squabbles the medieval writers tried to force onto them.
So as we trace this journey into the modern era, subtext can only stay buried for so long. As the strict religious grip of the Middle Ages gave way to the romanticism of the Victorian era, artists started looking for characters who embodied rebellion.
Right.
Modern culture slowly begins to realize that the great villain of Camelot was actually a suppressed goddess waiting to be rediscovered.
And that aesthetic reclamation starts powerfully with the Victorian pre-Raphaelite painters.
The art from this era is absolutely stunning. The sources mention an 1864 painting by Anthony Frederick Sandys, and you just have to picture it. It's a portrait of Morgan weaving a magical mantle.
It's iconic.
She has this thick, dark hair. She is staring with intense, almost defiant concentration, and she is surrounded by these arcane symbolic objects and ancient looms. She isn't painted as an ugly, cackling witch with a wart on her nose.
No, not at all.
She is ominously beautiful, intensely magnetic, and completely unapologetically in her power. You can see why it was so shocking to Victorian audiences. They established this iconic, dark aesthetic for her that still resonates today.
But the true narrative shift, the moment she really reclaims her voice, happens in the 20th century. The absolute watershed moment is Marion Zimmer Bradley's 1983 novel, The Mists of Avalon.
Oh, that book flipped the script completely.
Completely.
It retold the entire Arthurian legend, but from the perspective of the women behind the throne. Think about how shifting the point of view fundamentally changes the narrative of Western civilization.
Right.
In the book, Morgan or Morgaine becomes the tragic protagonist. She is actively defending the old, nature-based, matriarchal Celtic religion against the aggressive encroachment of the new patriarchal Christianity.
It completely shifts the lens from a story of, good knights fighting bad witches to a heartbreaking story of cultural erasure.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychological readings of her character that emerged around this time suddenly make perfect sense. We mentioned Jung earlier. He talks about the concept of anima projection.
Which is basically a 1,000-year-old lesson in media literacy.
Exactly. The idea is that medieval male writers took everything they feared within their own psyches, the autonomy of the physical body, the darkness of night, eroticism, the terrifying reality of their own mortality, and they exteriorized all of it.
Wow.
When society is terrified of something, it writes a monster to safely project that fear onto. They projected all their anxieties onto female figures like Morgan and confidently labeled it evil.
Because it's so much easier to fight a witch with a sword than to fight your own existential fear of death.
Precisely.
Mhm.
And later psychologists like Clarissa Pinkola Estes view Morgan as the ultimate wild woman archetype. She represents the vital, instinctual knowledge that lives below the surface of our polite rationality.
And today, within modern paganism and Wicca, she is actively honored as the dark goddess. She is the patroness of healers, of outcasts, and of those who work in the liminal spaces. But, looking at all these modern interpretations, I do want to push back on one thing.
Oh, how do you mean?
Well, I think if we just look at her purely as a victim of history, like, oh, the poor misunderstood goddess who was bullied by medieval monks, it kind of robs her of her edge.
I see what you're saying.
Because the beauty of her modern reclamation is that it fully embraces the wounded healer paradox. She isn't just a passive victim of a smear campaign. She is powerful specifically because she knows how to wound and how to heal.
Right.
The deepest healing usually requires you to acknowledge and sometimes fully inhabit the wound itself. She's the one who holds that terrifying space.
She is the most complete record we have of what happens to a goddess when civilization decides it can no longer accommodate her.
Yeah.
They threw everything they had at her. They tried to make her a petty ex-lover, a wicked witch, a thief, a traitor, but she remained a goddess underneath it all.
It really is a staggering journey you've sent us on. From the primal truth of the Morrigan washing the armor of the dead to the pure apple orchard healing of Jeffrey's Morgan, through the absolute smear campaign of the French romances in Mallory, where she was stripped of her divinity and painted as a jealous sorceress stealing scabbards.
And finally, her rising from those narrative ashes to become a psychological and feminist icon of the deep feminine.
Yes.
It makes you think about the modern stories we consume today. Who are the characters we instantly label as difficult, villainous, or too complex?
That's a great point.
How much of our own societal anima projection is still happening right now in our media? The next time you see a female antagonist on screen or in a book who refuses to be easily categorized, ask yourself, what ancient suppressed truth is she actually trying to protect?
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, who brought us this incredible stack of sources? It means the next time you feel torn between your own contradictions, the parts of you that are fiercely defensive and the parts of you that just want to heal, remember the Isle of Avalon. Look at the apple orchards of your own life and the paradoxes they hold.
Because the fruit grows there entirely on its own, regardless of what anyone tries to write about it.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.